Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I would like to start with my own land acknowledgement as well, because I'm in Sacramento, not in Santa Cruz area. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm sitting on the traditional and unceded lands of Nishinan people, the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, Patwin Wintun peoples, and the people of Wilton Rancheria, Sacramento's only federally recognized tribe. May we acknowledge and honor the Native people who come before us and still walk beside us today on these ancestral lands by choosing to gather together today in the active practice of acknowledgement and appreciation for Sacramento's Indigenous people's history, contribution, and lives. And with that, I will be happy to tell you all about my capstone project and what I did during my capstone year using policy relevant science to accelerate progress on California's Central Valley Chinook salmon restoration. So let's start with the basics. What are Chinook salmon? I'm sure many of you know, but might be some folks here who aren't as familiar. So Chinook salmon are anadromous fish, meaning they migrate from the ocean to spawn in freshwater, and then their offspring return back to the ocean to grow. Chinook salmon are an important food source for wildlife and people. And they also facilitate a massive transfer of nutrients between the marine and freshwater environments when they perish after spawning, because after Chinook salmon spawn, they do pass away, unfortunately. And this massive transfer of nutrients supports ecosystems and farms in California. There's a lot of evidence showing that farms adjacent to streams with salmon are much more productive than farms near streams that do not contain salmon at all. So they are a keystone species and play a big role in the ecosystem in California and across the Western United States. And so where do salmon live? So Chinook salmon occupy a large part of the Pacific Ocean, kind of this north end of the Ring of Fire. And California is the southern extent of the range in North America. And this makes Chinook salmon in California particularly vulnerable to disturbance, straining their tolerance to water temperatures and water availability. And you can also see that much of their historic spawning distribution, California, is blocked in the west coast of the US, particularly in California. So let's zoom in to see how much of that habitat is blocked here in the Central Valley of California. So 90% of historic spawning habitat is blocked by impassable dams throughout the Central Valley of California. This reduction of spawning habitat now greatly limits the ability of Chinook salmon to reproduce in the Central Valley and has led to a reliance on hatchery production to keep the species afloat. So now we have many hatcheries where these black squares are, where the dams are, because they cannot spawn in the rivers in these areas shown in black now, which they have lost pretty much in the last century or so. And these are the agencies that are primarily responsible for the management of Chinook salmon in California. So for endangered species, the federal government takes charge. For listed species such as the spring run Chinook, which is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Winter run Chinook is listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. And then we have California Department of Fish and Wildlife, primarily managing the unlisted fall run Chinook, which is the primary supporter of the recreational and commercial fisheries in California. And so we have these three agencies primarily working together to manage Chinook salmon, but also a few other agencies such as Department of Water Resources and the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. This is also involved in water management and very involved with issues that affect Chinook salmon. So indigenous peoples in California have harvested Chinook salmon since time immemorial. This fish is an integral part of their culture. European colonization has significantly damaged and continues to damage the ability of indigenous peoples to harvest Chinook. Restoring and maintaining the ability of these peoples to fish for Chinook salmon is a matter of justice and the right thing to do and pursue. Chinook salmon also support a vibrant commercial and recreational fishery in California, with around 9,000 jobs in the California domestic seafood industry, and a large part of these jobs being supported by the Chinook salmon industry. So in 2020, there's around $14 million in Chinook harvest revenue. And it's a very important industry for rural coast communities in California, such as Fort Bragg, Eureka, Crescent City, and is a source of great local seafood for California communities. And you can primarily find California Chinook salmon at your local farmers markets and at higher end restaurants, salmon in California have become more of a boutique industry. It is pretty rare to find these at your local grocery store because of how rare they have become. Chinook salmon also support commercial passenger fishing vessels, also known as charter boats, that you can pay to go on, catch your limit of Chinook salmon out in the ocean. And it also supports a lot of business in rural coastal California communities. And it's a lot of fun. I've done it a few times, and supports a lot of business in these coastal communities such as Bodega Bay and Fort Bragg, Eureka. A lot of these spots depend on thriving Chinook salmon runs to keep these charter boat vessels going. Chinook salmon also supports a lot of tourism, guide services, and tackle shops that surround the freshwater Chinook salmon fishery. Is a large source of income for rural communities in California. So the in-river fishery also, every fall here in Sacramento, see tons of boats lined up to fish, and having lower Chinook salmon runs has really been devastating to these industries as well. And but it is a big part of business, especially in rural California. Think of places like Redding and Oroville, where a lot of folks take trips up there to get with a local guide and fish for these great Chinook salmon. And you can see back in the day, especially Chinook salmon used to be extremely abundant. People said you could walk across their backs in the river. However, today that is not the case, and Chinook salmon are in big trouble. Large media outlets are covering it, they're disappearing, and lack of water and lack of water quality is really threatening this very important species. We can see here throughout the years since 1985, just been a steady decline in how much Chinook salmon are in the Central Valley. And we see adult escapement reduce, which is fish that are able to escape from getting caught by the recreational and commercial fisheries that escape to spawn, has steadily gone down, and the amount of ocean harvest and river harvest has decreased dramatically throughout the years. So there is a marked decline in the species, and they need help. So habitat destruction is a big reason of why Chinook salmon are in decline. This habitat destruction primarily began in the 19th century from gold mining and has greatly diminished Chinook salmon numbers in California. Sprawling floodplains, important for juvenile Chinook salmon rearing that were once prevalent throughout the Central Valley, have been drained and levied to make way for farmland. There's not a lot of space in the Central Valley for these salmon to thrive, and they really need help in order to have more habitat available that has been taken through the many industries that have popped up in California throughout the last century. Agriculture municipalities such as Los Angeles have also taken away large amounts of water that used to run through the Central Valley out to the Golden Gate Bridge that would support large runs of salmon. Now folks are constantly fighting for what little water remains in the Central Valley, and lack of water hurts Chinook salmon by causing higher water temperatures and can cause deadly algal blooms in the river that are harmful to the fish as well as people. And massive dams that block the Central Valley block 90% of historic spawning habitat in the Central Valley. The water stored behind these dams is then sent to San Joaquin Valley and to Southern California, which is conveyed by massive pumps in the Southern Delta. Also inadvertently sucks small juvenile Chinook salmon into the pumps, as well as other species such as the endangered Delta smelt. But as you can see, there's no fish ladders on these dams, and there's no way they're getting past that thing. So let's kind of look at a summary of these issues and what these issues have caused, the problems that it's caused. It's reduced commercial and recreational ocean fishing seasons, reduced freshwater recreational fishing opportunities, and reduced tribal harvest opportunities. But what we really want to see in California is healthy California Chinook salmon populations by restoring California Chinook salmon ecological resilience. And here comes me. So I'm going to tell you all about my role and how we're going to achieve healthy California salmon populations. And that's not a salmon, that's a Lahan cutthroat trout, but close enough. And so this brings me to my practitioner partners that I sought to achieve this lofty goal with, which is the Golden State Salmon Association, a nonprofit that is into supporting local salmon fisheries, finding solutions that bring more water to salmon that support folks' livelihoods who depend on a thriving Chinook salmon fishery. The California Ocean Science Trust, which is a nonprofit that was created by legislation to provide independent scientific advice to the California legislature, also serving as the science advisor for the Ocean Protection Council. And then the California legislature, who I work for now as the assistant consultant for the Joint Committee on Fisheries and Aquaculture, and also the Assembly Committee on Water Parks and Wildlife, who I worked with in tandem with the California Ocean Science Trust. And so my solution to this difficult problem was to develop feasible action plans that the California legislature can enact and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife can implement. And I mainly focused on the California Department of Fish and Wildlife because Ocean Science Trust is a nonprofit focused on California, and now I work for the California legislature specifically. So where I can make the biggest difference is very state focused. So that's why I focused on California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so the path to achieving this solution, I created several deliverables that I think have made some progress in moving that restoration needle forward in salmon restoration in California. And so I wrote a commentary and white paper on solutions that CDFW can adopt to increase Chinook salmon resilience. And this guest commentary was mainly focused on infrastructure improvements the California Department of Fish and Wildlife can make to their hatcheries, many of which have not been updated since they were constructed in the 1970s or even earlier. And right now there's around $20 million in the budget to upgrade hatchery infrastructure in California. I've heard through the grapevine that this guest commentary might have played at least a small part in helping secure those funds and start that conversation. But these salmon hatcheries are not adapted to deal with the changes that are happening due to climate change, such as reduced water availability and reduced or higher water temperatures. So if we are going to continue having a salmon fishery in California, these hatcheries need to get brought into the 21st century through significant infrastructure upgrades. And that is what my guest commentary and white paper focused on. And with the California Ocean Science Trust, I created a document describing legislative involvement with the Chinook salmon fishery and similar documents for the Ocean Science Trust. So I primarily worked under the Legislative Science Services program in the California Ocean Science Trust. And what I really wanted to do is set them up with a list of folks who are interested in anadromous fish restoration to see if they can provide that independent scientific advice to some of these complex issues that they work on, with the focus of my project being Chinook salmon. And so hopefully in the future, they can use this document as a guide to see which folks to work with on salmon related and anadromous fish related issues. And I also created a landscape analysis for the Ocean Science Trust just as an overall guide to the salmon world in California. It lays out science institution, industry groups, nonprofits active on salmon issues, funding for salmon restoration, laws that govern salmon, how systems in the Delta work, how systems in the North Coast work, which endangered runs exist where in California. Just try to be an overall comprehensive guide that can be used by someone who really doesn't know much about Chinook salmon restoration in California, and that can be used as a starting point to address these complex issues for the Ocean Science Trust, if and when they decide to get involved on salmon issues. And I also sought to inform stakeholders and the public. So as the consultant for the Joint Committee on Fisheries and Aquaculture, I will be having a few hearings every year related to fisheries and salmon specifically. So this year I'm anticipating to scope and develop an informational hearing on California salmon issues with the legislature. You're all welcome to join, the public's welcome to join. There will be folks from the salmon industry, salmon fishermen, restoration folks, everyone in between is just come together and have a conversation and shed some light on the issues that our Chinook salmon fishery is facing. And I would also love to strategize and create a workshop outlining a menu of opportunities for Ocean Science Trust's engagement on California salmon. So now in my new role, we're planning to have a workshop in the fall with the Ocean Science Trust and just lay out ways that they can get more involved in Chinook salmon restoration, because they have not been before. And I just hope to provide useful information as well in my new position, working with other folks in the legislature and also executive agencies such as the Fish and Game Commission, who I work closely with at this position, and is try to act as a conduit between stakeholders and agencies to bring timely scientific advice in order to bring solutions that work for everyone on this complex issue of salmon restoration. And some key takeaways from my capstone year. I definitely achieved a greater understanding of stakeholder interactions. I thought I had a good idea before starting this master's program, but now I knew how naive I was. And I've really seen how folks in the salmon industry interact with conservation, nonprofits, and folks and agencies. It's a really complicated system and relationships, and I've learned so much about it during these past 2 years. And also kind of a more pragmatic takeaway is having clear funding numbers for fishery policy pitches. If you can come with exactly how much something's going to cost when you say you want to improve hatchery infrastructure or something like that, makes the process so much easier. So definitely that's something I've learned in these past 2 years for sure. And so how did my capstone help to solve this wicked problem of salmon restoration? It provided invaluable scientific advice to the legislature and executive agencies on behalf of the Ocean Science Trust. And now as someone who works for the legislature, I can continue to provide this timely scientific information as I take on some of these issues head on in my new position and look for ways that legislation or funding can really help bring salmon back from the brink in California. And I think my capstone project really did a good job of building relationships. And something I'm going to continue in my new position is just working with stakeholders can find a solution that works for everyone, bringing everyone to the table to find a solution that everyone can agree on. It's easier said than done, but opening up a dialogue through the fisheries forum that the Joint Committee on Fisheries and Aquaculture holds every year is really important for finding compromises and solutions to these wicked issues. And so I think next steps, something I'd like to work on in my career is just increasing cooperation and trust between CFW and stakeholders. I think it's something that's getting better, but I would like to use my position to facilitate that trust and increase trust in salmon fisheries with the agency, but also other fisheries as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Sally Christine Rogers and Randy Repass for this amazing opportunity as the inaugural Repass Rogers Fellow. Can't thank you both enough for this amazing opportunity. It's been such an amazing experience. And of course, thank you to John McManus, President of the Golden State Salmon Association, for his mentorship throughout these 2 years as well. And I'd like to thank my wonderful advisors, Dr. Ann Kapuscinski and Dr. Palkovacs, for their great support throughout these 2 years. And Kia Bibby and Dr. Keith Ciolino, who have provided a lot of support and mentorship throughout my capstone year as well. And with that, I will take any questions. Thank you.